Newfoundland Park at Beaumont Hamel. The majestic caribou looks out over St. John's Road, the danger tree where many Newfoundlanders died. On to no man's land and the German trenches. 40 acres of land purchased from French farmers after the war by the Newfoundland government as a lasting memorial to those who fought and to those who died here on July 1st, 1916. On the 75th anniversary of that battle, 3 members of the regiment who were there on that day are still living. Abe Mullett, 99 years old, the only surviving blue Puttee. Born in Wesleyville, he volunteered for 2 advance raiding parties and was a stretcher bearer on July 1st. He lives in St. John's. Ron Dunn, 94 years old, born in Bonavista. He was an underage volunteer and went over the top on July 1st. He lives in Bonavista. Walter Tobin, 93 years old, was born in Boston to Newfoundland parents. He and his brother James were at boarding school in St. John's when the war broke out. Also an underage volunteer, he went over the top on July 1st. He lives in Waldoboro, Maine. You will meet them all in the next hour. At Newfoundland Park, the birds sing, and visitors speak in hushed tones. This is a peaceful place, a special place, a place where brave men fought and died. July 1st, 1916, 7:20 a.m. The explosion of mines at Hawthorne Ridge. The first of many mistakes to be made this day. 0 hour was 10 minutes away. The Germans had been warned. They manned their machine guns. At exactly 7:30 a.m., the British assault began. They were decimated. The Newfoundlanders were well back in the support trenches, unaware of what was happening, and when their turn came, 801 officers and men went over the top. The next morning, only 68 men answered the roll call.
The mistakes, big mistake, should never happen.
I just got outside of the trench.
And they gave it to us, I sure do. We sweat back and forward, so, wherever they see a man alive, they kill.
This day had become part of Newfoundland history forever. When war was declared on August 4th, 1914, Governor Davidson immediately told London that 500 Newfoundlanders could be enlisted within a month. He issued a proclamation, and in 10 days, 743 men had signed up. Not all were accepted, but Abe Mullett was.
I had the feeling when the war started in England, well, we were the British colony, we were the oldest colony in England. I thought that really it was anyone's duty to join the army and fight.
Walter Tobin, 16 years old at the time, was too young to join, but his brother James did.
War was declared sometime in August 1914, and my brother Jimmy, he joined the regiment. His regimental number was 69, and Jimmy and I got along very well, and I wanted to be with him, really.
A few months later, Walter Tobin would lie about his age and follow his brother to war. Newfoundland, Britain's oldest colony, was at war. She had no army. And now there were 500 farmers, fishermen, office workers, and teachers who had to be turned into fighting soldiers quickly. A training camp was set up at Pleasantville on the shores of Kitty-Vitty Lake, and the task began. They had no uniforms, boots, puttees, or guns. Everything a soldier would need had to be found or made. A committee of citizens, later called the Patriotic Association of Newfoundland, was formed, and while the training continued at Pleasantville, they set to work. 500 rifles were ordered from Canada. Local clothing manufacturers were commissioned to produce uniforms. When no khaki could be found to make the puttees, the committee compromised and used blue material. From then on, the first 500 were known as the blue puttees. October 4th, 1914. The blue puttees boarded the sealing ship Florizel to begin their voyage to war. Abe Mullett was one of them.
We had a nice trip, but we were only the one ship made there. But we joined the Canadian convoy off of Cape Race, about 60 miles off of Cape Race. We were with that convoy all the way over. We went over somewhere around 11 days, I think. We had no trouble.
Walter Tobin was on the dock that day. His brother was also leaving on the Florizel.
It hurt me because I was losing a very dear friend, my brother. People were, well, excited and say, well, the boys are going away and they'll be back soon. And which we all anticipated they were not going to be a long time, 3 years or more. And that's the way it turned out. It was something new. It's just like watching a motion picture that we get you stirred up emotionally.
Governor Davidson had made good his promise. The 1st Newfoundland Regiment A Company was on its way. But that would only be the beginning. In January of 1915, the first of many letters from Blue Puttee Frank Lind was published in the Daily News. Mayo Lind, as he would come to be known, was born in Betts Cove, Notre Dame Bay. He hoped his letters would bring some comfort to those left behind.
December 26, 1914, in Inverness-shire, Scotland. We arrived at Fort George on December 8th. We swung along then in good style, but on entering the fort, the band played the Maple Leaf. They did not seem to know that Newfoundland is not Canada. Everywhere in England, we were taken as Canadians, and they would favor us with the Maple Leaf, when what we wanted to hear was the banks of Newfoundland. Now, however, they know us as Newfoundlanders, and are even arranging patriotic airs suitable to dear old Terra Nova.
By April of 1915, 4 more companies had sailed from St. John's. Walter Tobin, now 17, but still 2 years underage, could wait no longer.
I joined up in May 1915. I was a cantankerous kid, I suppose, at the time. My uncle didn't wish to have me go. I didn't tell my mother, who was in Boston. I didn't tell her anything about it.
Mayo Lind's letters were now telling in great detail about life in the training camps of Scotland.
May 20th, 1915, Stobe's Camp, Scotland. Boys are making a great showing. When we all get on parade, 1,300 strong, and, as the Edinburgh people say, the fittest-looking body of men they ever saw. And by the time we leave here, we will be a body of men as hard as nails. We are hard at drill from 5:30 a.m. until 4:30 p.m. Skirmishing, squad drill, company drill, and physical exercise. And with regard to the physical drill, we have a drill instructor, an old Seaforth man, and what he doesn't know about it is not worth talking about. In addition to this, he has organized boxing and wrestling matches for the evening. Corporal Stan Goodger is Highliner so far, and Stan is a hard man to beat. He has a grip like iron and a punch like the fall of a thunderbolt. We're so thankful to the kind friends at home for what they're doing for us. The hardest problem we smokers have to face is the tobacco. It's almost impossible to get good tobacco in this country. A stick of mayo is indeed a luxury.
Although ships leaving St. John's Harbor carrying soldiers to war had almost become commonplace, residents still turned out in large numbers to see them off. Perhaps it was more so in June of 1915 when the giant British troop ship Calgarian came in to pick up the latest contingent.
I went over in the Calgarian with F Company. That was a reserve company. And I met Jimmy sometime in June 1915 in Scotland. he was quite surprised to see me. And then he took me under his wing.
As Tobin adjusted to camp life and the rigors of training, Mayo Lynn's letters were having an impact at home.
July 14th, 1915, Stove's Camp. We're all so thankful for the Mayo Lynns. They arrived Saturday. The efforts of the Daily News we will never forget. Little did I think that the few words in one of my letters would result in such a generous donation of tobacco. But that a stick of Mayo is a luxury is certainly true. It is the tobacco we all enjoy. This lot will likely be distributed in a day or two, and if anybody doubts our love for Mayos, then they ought to be present on the day it's given out. It is needless to say that I am now called Mayo Lynn.
Although he didn't know it at the time, that would be his last letter from Stove's camp, and their training would soon be over.
August 13th, 1915, Aldershot, England. Yesterday, memorable day. Lord Kitchener came from London and inspected the battalion. There were about 20,000 men present from different regiments besides ours, but the Newfoundland Regiment was the only one Kitchener addressed. And almost his first words were, "I am sending you to the Dardanelles shortly, so be prepared. For when the order comes, it will come sharply."
And come sharply it did. In less than a week, the Newfoundland Regiment was on board the SS Megantic, headed for Gallipoli.
We landed there, Suvla Bay, and, it was quite something. Well, the Turks spotted us at daybreak, and they started shelling with their high explosives, shrapnel. And we had our adjutant, he was hit, and several others. I don't know how many were hit in that first shelling. It was the first time we had been under fire. We started to dig in.
It was really bad in Gallipoli. The food wasn't so good. Sometimes you got a little and sometimes you got none. But what you did get wasn't so good.
We were bothered by flies. You'd open a can of jam, you'd get a spoonful of this jam, and before you got it to your mouth, it was filled with flies. Well, of course, you try to brush off as many as you possibly could, but you'd eat some of the flies. And then there's a matter of water. We were told not to take any water from the wells, because the Turks, when they retired, they threw a lot of their bodies into these wells, and we didn't use that water at all.
You'd be up to your knees in mud, as I said before, halfway up to your knees in your mud. Wet feet all the time, your feet would be wet all the time. That's why we lost a lot of our boys through what they call trench feet.
We lost more men through sickness. We had dysentery, we had jaundice, and we had enteric fever. And within a short space of time, we lost a great many men. We didn't lose too many men by rifle or shell fire. Very few. But our trouble was with, disease. And just worn out.
But even in the cold realities of war, there were touches of humanity, as Ron Dunn remembers.
One night, we were out, and one of our boys got hit, wounded. And I was calling with him. He was a boy from Bannister, Lynn Ailey, he's dead now. And I was calling with him, and he was sick, lots of blood. And we meet two men crawling out. And they said, wounded, maybe? Yes. And the horse go on. And we discovered there were two Turks.
Although there were no major battles by the Newfoundland Regiment in Gallipoli, snipers, disease, and trench feet had taken their toll. Their ranks were seriously depleted, and the worst was yet to come.
We had a storm, a terrific storm, in November. The Turks were washed out. They were up in the hills. The Turks were washed out of their trenches. We were washed out of our trenches. It was cold. It rained. It snowed. And hail. And ice was formed. And it was a terrible time. And we lost, well, about a third of our strength because of that storm. We were pretty weak anyway because of the food we had to eat. And the privation was just not too pleasant.
By Christmas 1915, a new commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Haddo, had joined them, and the decision to abandon Gallipoli had been made. Though their bodies were worn, their spirit was high.
Final evacuation was the 9th day of January, the day before my birthday. The 9th day of January, 1916. We evacuated Cape Helles without a casualty. And I recall the night before we left, under a marquee tent, a great, huge tent, a lot of British soldiers were there, and we had some kind of a concert going on. Some fellow could play a piano, and another chap could sing, had a very fine voice, and I recall him singing, "Somewhere a Voice is Calling," but instead of using the words like John McCormick, that was his favorite piece, he used words that they made up regarding the 29th Division. Somewhere the 29th Division was doing this and that. And I think every fellow there had tears in his eyes. I know I did.
The next 2 months were spent in Egypt awaiting reinforcements. There was no rest, though, as Colonel Haddo was determined to make the Newfoundland Regiment second to none.
And I recall him say one time we were formed, companies were formed up, and Colonel Haddo said he wouldn't tolerate his troops becoming bored. He said, if I realize that and find it out, he said, I shall do something about it. Well, he did.
One of his favorite ways of relieving boredom was long desert route marches. Tobin describes one of them.
We marched across the desert, and sun was up, get very hot. Started to march back, and fellows start dropping out, just exhausted. And then they halted the battalion, called the roll, and when others stood up from the sun and the heat just flopped off. And if you didn't answer your name, you were punished. You were punished what was called FP number 1. That's called Field Punishment number 1. And that consisted of being tied a hand and foot to what they call a GS wagon, or a General Service Wagon. You couldn't move. You were tied there. Well, we didn't have any GS wagons there, but we got back, and some of the fellows got Field Punishment number 1. Others got FP, Field Punishment number 2. That consisted of filling your pack with sand and march by a drill sergeant for a couple of hours, steady. Well, we didn't have any GS wagons or wheels, so we put stakes in the ground, and fellows were tied to these stakes. And these stakes didn't go too far down through the sand. And after a while, it got pretty hot in the sun, pulled up the stakes and went on the cardinals. Well, I took care of that.
In mid-March, they were shipped off to France, unaware that the British and French generals were planning a major offensive for the end of June. Soldiers, says Tobin, just did what they were told.
We had no idea. In fact, the ordinary soldier, the buck private, he didn't know what was going on. The non-coms knew a little, but not very much. The lieutenants do a little more. The captains do a little more. The colonels a little more. The generals, they do a lot. But passed down to the ordinary soldier, he was just one little sheep in the flock.
After we got to France, in the trenches, we'd be in the trenches for 2 weeks, and then we go back to the small villages, and then we get mixed up with the French people. for a couple of weeks, then go back to the trenches again.
Through it all, the Newfoundlanders still found time for a joke and some fun.
I recall after a long hike, I don't know, 22 kilos from one village to the next, we got into this barn. There were a lot of bully beef tins there. And so start tossing about some guy trying to get to sleep. And he knew who was throwing the tin cans at him. And he said, I'll tell you once. I'll tell you twice. But by Jesus, I'll tell you no more. I'll wallop thee.
By June, the regiment knew that a major battle was planned. Mayo Lind writes,
June 4th, 1916. Here we are, at it again, this time somewhere in France. These French people have great hope of the British. And they say to themselves, we will not let the Germans come any further. And sure enough, it is about turn Mr. German must take when the Newfoundland boys and the others get properly underway. Tell all friends that the 1st Newfoundland are okay, and never feel downhearted. We will make you all proud of us someday.
The Newfoundland Regiment was now part of the family to the villagers of Louvencourt.
There were two sisters. One was Germaine Boer. They were very fine, attractive young ladies. And they pinned on sewed on the red triangle. We had the red triangle and also the regimental colors, claret and white or cream color. And I have both of them. And this young lady, French gal, Germaine, she sewed these divisional insignia on my jacket.
The Battle of the Somme, to be fought on a 16-mile front, was now only days away. Set for 7:30 a.m. on June 29th, the soldiers still hadn't been told, but a massive bombardment meant to destroy the German barbed wire had begun on Sunday, June 24th. They went to church that day, knowing that a big battle was imminent.
I had the suspicion that we were going into battle. It was our first time, of course. First time to take part in a major assault. And in fact, we had church service, I know, that Sunday prior to that. It was a Saturday, I think, it was Saturday morning. But we had church service on a Sunday, and being a Catholic, I went to Father Nagel, I think it was, and went to confession. And that sort of gave us some idea. And then, of course, we were in our pay books, we made out a will. I have a pay book right here. You make out your will, you'll have your mother, your father, some relative. And there was another indication that something was going to happen.
But the weather turned bad that week, and the British had difficulty assessing the results of the bombardment. And volunteers from the Newfoundland Regiment were asked to go on a raiding party to help in that assessment. Abe Mullett was one of those volunteers.
They wanted 55 volunteers. And anyone could volunteer for it if they want. So I was one of the 55 to volunteer to go on that advance. What we did, we had to go up as close we get to the German trenches if we could bring back a prisoner, you see. If we could do it. So anyhow, we got up as close as we could. I suppose we got up roughly around 20 yards from his front, from his barbed wire, because all his trenches were lined off with barbed wire. We got up about 20 yards from them, I suppose. That's all. They caught us, they seized, so they opened fire. All we had to do was lie as low as we could on the field. We stayed there until I suppose about 2 or 3 hours, maybe more. And we had to give up and retire back again to where we started from. But we lost Well, we must have lost about 25 or 30 soldiers, killed, wounded.
The reports were watered down as they came back.
Martin Middlebrook is a military historian and the author of 12 books. Among them, The First Day on the Somme, published in 1971, and The Somme Battlefields, published in 1991.
Each commander at the front would think, well, it was his particular section where maybe the barbed wire wasn't so well cut, and probably on either side the attack would be successful. Hopefully also the last 2 days or 1 day of the bombardment would finish it off.
So in my opinion, they knew they wasn't going to get anywhere. The Germans were too strong. They were too well fortified every way. So to get up to the trenches.
The generals had a quick meeting and decided to keep up the bombardment. The battle was postponed until July 1st. The Newfoundland Regiment remained in Louvencourt. They would wait another 48 hours to put their training to the test. Mayo-Lind wrote another letter home.
France, June 29th, 1916. We're out to billets again for a short rest, returning to trenches tomorrow, and then... But never mind that now.
In less than 24 hours, the battle would begin. A battle described by General Delisle as the beginning of the end of the war. Their time in Louvencourt had been good. Their time in the trenches was tough. Mayo-Lind describes what it was like.
I wish I could just, in imagination, take you into the trenches. I wish I could illustrate to you just what it's like, but I cannot. No pen could describe what it's like, how calmly one stands and faces death.
9 p.m., June 30th, 1916. As they had done many times before, the Newfoundland Regiment formed up just outside Louvencourt. As the summer sun was setting, the Newfoundland Regiment began their 13-kilometer march to the front, and their role in what was to be the largest single battle of the war. They arrived at the support trenches at 2 a.m. On their right was the 1st Essex Regiment, and in front were 4 battalions of the 87th Brigade. They would be the first to go over the top. At 6:25 a.m., the intense bombardment began, as it had for the last 8 days. But this day was different. 0 hour was now only 65 minutes away. When the mines at Hawthorne Ridge exploded at 7:20, the Germans also knew this was the day they had waited for.
I think it's quite clear that Hunter Weston, the Corps Commander's decision to blow the Hawthorne Crater mine 10 minutes before 0 hour instead of 2 minutes, like all the other mines, was a major mistake. It certainly warned the Germans that something was coming. Mining warfare was not new. They knew that mines, after a bombardment that had lasted 4, 5, 6 days, would be the prelude to the main attack. And to give the Germans 10 minutes notice, as they did, meant that those German soldiers down in the dugouts could really get their equipment on, get themselves all ready on the stairs of their dugouts, ready for the bombardment to lift. It was, in a way, almost the perfect warning that they could have given the Germans, and it brought the British very little advantage. A major mistake. And of course it was just a few yards over the ridge from where the Newfoundlanders attacked.
At exactly 7:30 a.m., the 87th Brigade went over the top and advanced toward the German lines. In less than an hour, they had been annihilated. The generals were frantically trying to decide what to do next. Finally, General Cayley ordered the Newfoundlanders and the 1st Essex over the top as soon as possible. But the commanding officer of the 1st Essex refused to go.
Newfoundlanders, however, Lieutenant Colonel Hadow, I don't know what his correct pronunciation is, referred it to the brigade commander and said, look, I can't get to the front line on time. What am I to do? And he was told, go over the top from where you are. So the Newfoundland attack, on its own, the Essex were not in action at that time, starts from the line which is now level with the Caribou Memorial, They had to proceed over the open ground to the British front line, down into it, climb up out of it, proceed to the British barbed wire, negotiate the gaps, which were narrow, of course. The earlier battalions had gone through quietly through those gaps under the cover of the artillery barrage. No such thing. So here you have the 700-odd men of the Newfoundland Battalion completely in the open. Any artillery support had been hardly worth having. No supporting troops on either side.
Harold got the word to advance. So he hopped out of the trenches and did advance. Brrr. Machine gun fire just wiped right out.
They swept back and forward, so wherever they see a man alive, they killed.
I just got outside of the trench. There was a fellow who was badly hit, Billy Somerville, I think that's his name. No, I'm not sure. And I was able to get out of my water bottle to give him some water. And while I was doing that, machine gunners spotted us, apparently. There was no other motion. Didn't see anybody advancing. And I was hit in the hip, right alongside of Billy Somerville. Whether he was hit or not, I do not know. I don't know. But he was in a bad way when I left him. If I attempted to stand up or try to drag him, I'd draw more machine gun fire. So I got back as best I could.
Walter Tobin's time on the battlefield that day was short, but for Ron Dunn, it was the beginning of an ordeal that he still remembers vividly today.
One of the boys got killed getting up out of the trench that we were in before we started. We went on, 6 of us, and each shot of film. This power went on. There was only 2 of us left, and we went on, and I got it. He got killed before I died, and I got it. I got 2 bullets from me, wouldn't fight through. So I dropped, and the blood was coming out of me. So I couldn't move her a little bit first, and you wouldn't believe that they see me. And they fired 4 or 5 bullets, and I was over. I know then they see me. And I whatever I could reach, the grass, I plucked in the wound, stopped the blood. And the blood stopped a bit soon. So the sun was pouring down, and they were shelling beyond everything, the Germans. Sunday come, and out they pick. I lived through Sunday, and when sun went down there Sunday evening, give up. I said my prayers, and I was shooting my mother, I see. I said, no, that's right. But Mom wasn't there, but that's what was on my mind, thinking. And I give up. Don't know who picked me up. I don't know nothing about. So I woke up in Bristol hospital.
It was a dream target for any German machine gunner or rifleman. I never use the word sniper. Rifleman is the word. And of course, they started accepting casualties the moment they went over the top from that British reserve line. Now, we shall never know in detail, but I strongly suspect that the majority of the casualties of the Newfoundlanders were received in the first 150 yards. In other words, in the British lines and in the British barbed wire, and then the last few yards coming out of the barbed wire. I doubt very much whether any Newfoundlander got as far as the German wire. If they did, they were singletons and they were shot down. It was just one great tragedy.
In less than 20 minutes, the battle that Mayo Lind had hinted at in his letter of June 29th was over. It was clear that he had expected a much different result.
I will ring off for this time, but we'll write you again shortly, when I hope to send you a very interesting letter. tell everybody that they may feel proud of the Newfoundland Regiment. With kind regards.
But Mayo Lind would write no more letters. He died on that morning and rests here in Y Ravine Cemetery in Newfoundland Park. The survivors of the two raiding parties were assigned as stretcher bearers that day. Abe Mullett remembers what it was like.
Well, we were thinking that we were going to lose a lot of soldiers. We were going to lose a lot of our friends. We knew that. Wherever you look, or wherever you try to walk, there was a silo. One day, because I had the way of getting through it. But you had to try to get through it the best way you could, you know. Then, wherever you looked into a silo, there was one of our boys, probably. They had a dinner on it. And our job was then to pick up the wound. Get them back to our own. Right. It was pretty tough to go pick up your friend. It was probably just his last moment to live, like that. You feel a lot about it. But on the other hand, we thought that's war, that's it.
There were other battalions on other sectors of the front later in the day that were issued with similar orders. This was not unique. Reserve battalions were required for this, but it just so happened that the geographical and tactical situation in front of the Newfoundlanders and the fact that they all got up and went, there was no hanging back, that was responsible for their great loss.
Every British advance failed that day, with dead and wounded numbering more than 57,000. The Newfoundland Regiment was second only to the West Yorkshire Regiment in the number of losses suffered. And the people of Newfoundland received eloquent testimony of the bravery of her dead and wounded sons. From Field Marshal Sir Douglas Haig, Newfoundland may feel proud of her sons. The heroism and devotion to duty has never been surpassed. Their example will live. From General Delisle, it was a magnificent display of trained and disciplined valor, and only failed because dead men can advance no further.
It seemed to me that what happened to the Newfoundland Regiment perhaps epitomized, as much as any event in World War I, the folly of the war, the slaughter of the war, the inhuman and inhumane treatment of men.
James Atwater is a former editor of Time magazine and now professor of journalism at Columbia University in Missouri. He became fascinated by the Newfoundland Regiment while researching a book on World War I.
They're amazingly resilient people. They somehow went through it. And the main question they kept asking me quietly and very politely, because they didn't want to disturb me, was, well, why are you interested in what we did? I was, of course, fascinated by what they did because they did it, and I didn't think anybody would do what they had gone through.
Atwater eventually wrote a separate article on the Newfoundland Regiment, and it was published in the prestigious Smithsonian magazine.
I had vastly admired the people. It seemed to me that that kind of heritage produced the kind of people who did what the regiment did, men in the regiment did.
Nachdem also der Angriff der beiden Bataillone, eins von der Hecke da hinten bis hier vor.
Norbert Kruger is a German historian and teacher who brings small groups of students to Newfoundland Park.
I told them that this was a regiment of volunteers who came to Europe for fighting against the Germans, and that they were here in France and came to the front line only to do their job for 30 minutes, and then this regiment had been ripped out. And I think we have seen on the gravestones the age, between 18 and 30, 35 years old men, young men they were. And that must have been an event very important for Newfoundland.
So, as Field Marshal Haig had predicted, their example did live, and the sacrifice of the Newfoundland Regiment is still remembered, even by some Germans. Later, Norbert Kruger's students got together with 3 Newfoundland students and had some questions for Walter Tobin.
What do you think when you come here today and see the place and see Germans? Are you hateful or are you sad?
I am not at all hateful. One of the bravest men I ever experienced to see alive was a German shock troop. He was came from his trench over to our trench in a raid. Before he could throw the bomb or potato masher, he was shot standing up.
Why did so many people lie to go to war? Why?
Well, primarily it's an adventure for a young man. And it's an escape, really. In my case, it was my brother was in the regiment, and I wanted to be with him.
Was haben denn Ihre Eltern gemacht, als Sie in den Krieg gezogen sind?
What did your parents say when you were a volunteer to go to war?
My parents were in Boston. I was in St. John's, Newfoundland, going to school. I was going to college, St. Bonaventure's College. I was 16, 17 years of age. They didn't know about it until I joined. They had no choice in the matter. I was in. They tried to get me out, but I wouldn't have it. I wouldn't allow them to do so.
After all the death and destruction and all the trauma you went through, did you find it hard to adjust?
It stays with you. You sleep with it, really, oftentimes. And first, when you get back, you have nightmares. It's not very pleasant. Not very pleasant. As a matter of fact, I'm not afraid. I'm 93 years of age, and I still have qualms about it.
July 1st, 1991, the 75th anniversary of Beaumont Hamel. Abe Mullett and Walter Tobin had made the long trip to be here in France for this special ceremony.
I'm honored to be present, representing the Government of Canada.
The Honorable Gerald Merrithew, Minister of Veterans Affairs for Canada, tells the hundreds of people here why this day is so important in Newfoundland.
When the Newfoundland Regiment left the safety of St. John's Road and went over the top, they had no chance of achieving their objective. But that didn't stop the Puttees, laden down with 66 pounds of equipment each. They marched ahead into a veritable storm of machine gun fire and shelling.
Earlier in the day, the Newfoundland veterans had joined their former comrades for another ceremony at the impressive British monument at Teepbell. The Duke of Kent paid tribute to those who survived.
Take these men for your example. Like them, remember that prosperity and true happiness can only be for the free. That freedom is the sure possession of those alone who have the courage to defend it.
And those who died.
Each one has gained a glorious grave, not that sepulchre of earth wherein they lie, but the living tomb of everlasting remembrance, wherein their glory is enshrined. Remembrance that will live on the lips, that will blossom in the deeds of their countrymen the world over.
With the ceremonies over, Walter Tobin has a personal mission. To visit the grave of his brother Jimmy. James Tobin was killed at the Battle of Cambrai in November 1917. The next next day, it is back to the village of Louvencourt and a visit to another grave, that of Germaine Bourrat, the girl he remembers so fondly from that spring in 1916.
That's where Germaine and Antoinette are buried.
Right here. Right here.
Germaine Marie de Martin.
Yeah.
You know, you see the families, Martin and Bourrat. And Antoinette never got married.
Yeah, Antoinette
Never
but
got married.
Germaine. And
Germaine Marie de Martin.
And one had one son.
Yeah.
The house where Walter Tobin was billeted still stands. The barn is gone now, but Germaine's son, Maurice, still lives in the house, and Walter pays him a visit.
Monsieur Martin, je voudrais que vous rencontriez Walter Tobin. Walter, this is Mr. Martin, who's the son of your...
Germaine.
Germaine.
Ah ouais.
Germaine.
Ah ouais.
Et vous rappelez, you remember very well Germaine, but, ouais. And Antoinette. Antoinette was... No, Antoinette was his aunt.
Well, you know, Germaine, she sewed a red triangle on my shoulder.
This red triangle was sort of an identification badge before you left for the front, right?
Yes.
Donc c'est votre maman, comme je vous ai dit, qui, Germaine, qui avant qu'il monte au front, lui a cousu donc sur les épaules des triangles rouges d'identification avant de monter au front.
That was our divisional insignia.
C'était leur insigne de division.
29th Division, British Division.
Il était donc de la 29e division britannique, lui-même n'étant pas Terre-Neuve, mais s'étant engagé à Terre-Neuve. So you joined the British Army, but in Newfoundland, right?
In Newfoundland, yes. And here, the 29th Division, the
26th division dont ils faisaient partie.
And 88th Brigade. We were in the 88th Brigade. And we trained here for this first battle of the Somme.
Donc ils se sont entraînés ici. What was the age of Germaine?
Well, let's see. I was about 18 years myself, 1960. I was born 1898. And 1916, I was 18 years of age. Germaine was probably 4 or 5 years older than I.
3 years older. You got good memory.
Yes.
Elle avait donc 3 ans de plus. Germaine aurait 96 ans.
96 ans, oui.
Donc, she was from 1895, so your memory is good.
And it's strange that I can recall the name Germaine Bourrat. Over the years, it's strange.
Germaine Bourrat,
she was a very gracious lady.
Elle était beaucoup de charme.
Oui, oui.
C'est vrai, votre maman avait une belle présence.
C'est pour ça qu'il se rappelle davantage d'Antoinette.
That's why you remember better, what you say is that you remember better Germaine than Antoinette, because she was more charming than Antoinette?
Yeah. Well, I don't know really whether she was more charming than that Antoinette or not.
But you prefer Germaine?
Well, Germaine...
Parce que Germaine, il a cousu son
on the patches.
Ah oui, d'accord.
Parce que Germaine, il a cousu son insigne, c'est pour ça.
Yes, very great.
Maurice Martin and his wife are delighted that Walter has come back to their home. With 75 years between visits, there's a lot of catching up to do. The houses in Louvencourt haven't changed much, and neither has the village. The road out of town is still the same. A road the mayor of Louvencourt says Newfoundlanders helped to maintain.
The mayor was explaining to me that you were, in these days, donc nettoyer la route. So you must have been cleaning and repairing the roads because you must have been damaged because of a lot of traffic, right?
A lot of traffic. And what we call it fatigue parties.
Ah, yeah. Ils appelaient ça des soirées d'entraînement de fatigue pour to keep you busy.
To keep us busy, yes. Otherwise, we not to get bored, you know.
Pour qu'ils s'ennuient pas, donc on leur faisait faire ces choses-là.
Yeah, they have to keep the soldier doing something.
on the road which was leading you to the front. It was called, on appelait ça la route du front.
Oui, ça c'était la route du front.
That was called the front road. It was a direct road going straight to the front.
About 13 kilos.
The front, a little part of Newfoundland in the middle of France. And Walter Tobin comes back to Newfoundland Park for one final visit, this time with his friend from St. John's, Dr. David Parsons.
First group went over. They were mowed down. And from here, we went over the top and carried on towards the German lines. We were cut down just like this man with a scythe, a farmer with his scythe cutting his hayfield.
So you had to come all this distance before you even crossed the
yes.
front line
And that barbed wire was not cut up, and we had to get into our positions where we could get through our own barbed wire. Oh, it's so different. And now that I'm here, I really don't recognize it. Oh, gracious. Well, they say time heals all wounds, and it certainly has, because this is a glorious place.
After the Battle of Beaumont Hamel, there were less than 200 men left in the Newfoundland Regiment, but it was quickly rebuilt and went on to fight at Goudencourt, Monchy, and Cambrai. By 1918, over 6,000 Newfoundlanders had gone to war, and over 1,600 had paid the supreme sacrifice. Back in St. John's, the sergeants of the Newfoundland Regiment erected this monument to their fallen comrades. But the Newfoundland Patriotic Association wanted something more. Through their efforts, the National War Memorial was unveiled on July 1st, 1924. And the following year, Newfoundland Memorial College was opened on Parade Street in St. John's, dedicated to the men who died in World War I. In 1961, the present campus of Memorial University was rededicated to the fallen in both World Wars. The now peaceful French countryside has long since given way to fields of potatoes, wheat, and poppies. But peace has a high price, and the many cemeteries in this valley of the Somme remain as a silent reminder of the true cost of war. For most of us, Beaumont Hamel and the battle that took place there on July 1st, 1916, is merely a part of Newfoundland history. But for Abe Mullett, Ron Dunn, and Walter Tobin, it is a living memory.